everybody. It is great to see you at this digital DEF CON. I was just attending Mike's Python session, and boy, is that high level of geek that would be very difficult to top. So I'm not even going to try. This session is going to be about data visualization and really the data that we're all about trying to understand a little bit better. Really, once we have the data identified, what to do with that next, and how you as developers can have the biggest impact on changing people's minds on your organizations and of course on your work. So welcome. My name is Szymon Machajewski. I am Scott Hurry's Padawan. As you can see, he has an eye on me at all times. I've probably met quite a few of you at past DEF CONs, but really excited about being able to participate in this one just because doing great things in times when it is difficult to do anything, that's really an awesome thing. So I'm glad that I can see all of you. You know, just to warm up, let me ask a couple of questions. And so we're going to do a really quick poll, yes or no question. All right, I know about Blackboard Data. So let's see how well the Blackboard sales team is doing these days. All right, very nice. So we have quite a few people who. Very nice. So I'm going to show you the responses, right? So we have quite a few people who know about Blackboard Data, and that's great. Now, if you're self-hosted, then you sort of look at Blackboard Data over the fence. Let me ask then a follow-up question to this one. And in this one, we are going to ask, let's stop this one. All right, so now that you know something about it, are you using it? All right, so we can see the responses coming in. All right, very nice. So we're going to talk about Blackboard Data in just a moment, but certainly this is the hotcakes, the the bananas that we are all about, and something that Blackboard is doing that many other systems that we interact with lack. So we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. So using visualization to share the human impact of numbers. The universe is made of stories, not atoms. Now, I want to start by saying that the inspiration for this particular talk was based on the blog that Jack McKinley from Tableau Software and Robert Kusara, Michelle Wallace published. In that blog, they talked about storytelling, that storytelling is a cornerstone of human experience. That the universe may be full of atoms, but it's through stories that we truly construct our world. From Greek mythology to television series like Cosmos, stories have been shaping our experience on Earth for as long as we've lived on it. With a data story, hundreds of millions of rows can be distilled into a single narrative. By following that narrative, it's much easier to understand what's going on beneath the surface. The data can tell you what's happening, and a story can elucidate the cause. And so when I read that, I got goosebumps, and I thought this is really, really cool. And it's true that the brain can see images that last for just 13 milliseconds. Right? Our eyes can register 36,000 visual messages per hour. we can get sense of a visual scene in less than 1/10 of a second. 90% of information transmitted to the brain is visual. Visuals are processed 60,000 times faster in the brain than text, and 40% of nerve fibers are linked to the retinas. So just to demonstrate this, when we communicate with people, we often take different routes that are going to help us maybe to provide all the evidence to express ourselves clearly. And all stories have that element to bring enough data along to make the point. But there's our human nature that's based on visual stimuli, and so this is why this work is really so exciting. So visual communication helps data to stick longer in memory. It transmits faster. It can improve comprehension. It triggers emotion, and it motivates learners. So really at school and how important for Blackboard Learn, that the visual communication is a key way of learning. Now, Dr. Linnell Burmark made this comment, and he's a specialist in visual literacy. He says, unless our words, concepts, ideas are hooked onto an image, they will go in one ear and sail through the brain and go out the other ear. Words are processed by our short-term memory, where can only retain about 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2. But images, on the other hand, go directly into the long-term memory, where they are indelibly etched. So that's the reason why when you dig up all the data with your Python script out of Blackboard Data and the Learn system, and then you provide a spreadsheet, it is so much more difficult for your manager, for your CIO, to take that in and to process and to really have the right story around it. So the transmission of messages, just like on the slide that you're looking at right now, can be accelerated. Comprehension is also improved through images because the infographics, for example, are able to combine some keywords and then pictures. And so, infographics like the one published by Blackboard recently, where they were showing the increase in the usage of services of SaaS and so forth, that is a communication that can be quickly sent to instructors, to other people who can't help but to be impressed, and that's the speed of transmission. And then, of course, the emotions that are triggered. There's a lot to be said about a lot of emotional intelligence in IT work in general. Just because we talk all day long with computers that are perfect, their intelligence is perfect. And so when we switch to talk to a human being, and we were just correcting a perfect being, hours on end, we might miss on some of that human element and emotions that are required into consideration to be successful in living with other people. So I think our theme of DEF CON, of being in space, or of Blackboard World, being in space, really needs to be taken down to earth in a way that our audience are human beings, and they do not understand well, they do not communicate well, and they have all these emotions that are like a sea, and we are just a little boat that is struggling to stay alive. I mean, all of us just live on an edge, basically, of emotional down, and that kind of compassion is important when we talk about students or co-workers. And so those visuals can motivate learners. And so as much as we talk now about data that comes out of the Learn system, certainly this is a great lesson for educators as well. All right, so let's explore for a second some of the stories that are already being told in a visual way inside of Blackboard. And so we have the course reports, and there are graphics there. And so a graph is a good example of a visualization. And certainly we have pie graphs and bar charts and so forth. And these visualizations are helpful to a certain degree. The improvement to graphs some years ago were dashboards. And so now we had all kinds of dashboards that are going to inform everyone what needs to be done. But dashboards, just like a car dashboard, is for monitoring. It's to notice something that went wrong or to check. A dashboard by itself does not tell a story. A dashboard is just a quick view that everything has green on it. When you drive a car, you look down at the speedometer and you take your eyes away, because it's through the windshield that we actually experience the story of where we're going and why we're in that car. And so I want to talk today about taking those visualizations to another level where we can address those stories. Retention center, and of course in Blackboard original, in self-hosted, the retention center was often heavily used. And then in SAS, suddenly we could use it from inside of courses, but we did not see perhaps a view across multiple classes. As you can see in the screenshot, it's actually possible to bring up the retention center across multiple courses in SAS. And so I'll have a session on Thursday that talks about creating custom LTI tools out of many resources in Blackboard Learn that can be then attached to the tools area inside of base navigation, so that you can bring back, for example, the retention center in this kind of a view. But we had a little bit of visualization in the retention center, and that was important because the instructor was quickly able to understand where the students stood. And I think BB Stats was a good example of playing with visualizations, a number of different graphs, but it also included this speedometer. And I think that's a great relation to kind of a dashboard feeling where we were just producing a momentary view into the system. You know, how many clicks, how fast is your system going? And this is, of course, an open source project that you feel free to look into and modify. But Blackboard Ally also has visual elements which help to deal with emotions. So an instructor who sees all the red elements, we want them to be worried. And so those visual cues generate that. And then the screenshot towards the bottom, this actually comes also from BB Stats, the latest edition of adoption report, a latent analysis of design types for courses. So what you see here across different years, the holistic courses, which use a number of key tools in orange, and then in gray, complementary, and then file repository usage. So this visualization helps us to see how our system is maturing. So how are instructors using the system? Perhaps many are using it just to upload a file. And so we can see that really the growth in our system, at least at University of Illinois at Chicago, is in the holistic usage, which is exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Here's another storytelling inside of Blackboard Learn. We have a project also open source for Open Photo Raster, and right now it is undergoing an improvement into an LTI tool. And in this tool, you still will be able to see all the Gravatars, Blackboard avatars, and campus IDs of students, but also you can leave notes now right on top of pictures. So this good-looking student wants to be a singer, and so that came up as part of maybe office hours, and now I make a notation that's very much related to the picture, and it stays there. But the story coming out of the picture also says that the student has a preferred name of John, their pronoun, and they also have a pronunciation that they suggested. And I can the link on next to the little email icon, that link goes into Google Translate, which is going to find the first name and then attempt to suggest a pronunciation to the instructor. If you're interested in adopting this LTI tool, there's going to be a free version. Go ahead and sign up at this bit.ly URL to be notified when that's available. But this is again where especially online instructors are able then to visualize who the students are and then create stories around them and then recall the stories later on. So what makes a good visualization? Well, there are a number of competing interests here. For example, in the upper left, we have integrity. And so when we collect data and then we put it in the graph, really how important that we keep the right proportions, or that we don't cut off where the beginning of the graph is. Those techniques in the past were used to take out of proportion the differences, for example, on a graph. So let's say that there's a polling system of which presidential candidate is winning, and one is at 100 votes and the other one is at 88. If we show the graph with the base of 0, then we can see the difference to be only 18 points. But if we started at maybe 70 points, then even though the numbers might be displayed correctly visually, we're going to see a huge difference. And so that's a part of the integrity in visualizations. But the middle one, the story, that's the one that I wanted to bring up today, because this makes our graphs interesting. It also touches on the goal and the overall form. And it, of course, is necessary to have a successful visualization. So a number of elements. And so that's why it's so important for developers to have a little bit view into this methodology, because oftentimes the work that you do at the code level, by the time you present it, it needs to have the right story behind it. Otherwise, it might be pushed to the side as not useful. And so usefulness is in the top right, where it approaches the correct or the expected goal of what your team is currently doing. Now, as a contrast to visual communication, I wanted to mention a project that we're working with a company called Unified on, and that is a chatbot that, first of all, can access the help.blackboard.com documentation as well as internal KB, and also the REST API for asking questions like, how many items do I have to grade as an instructor. Now, this is text communication, so the opposite of our visual communication, but a necessary element, because when we get to some individual and specific communication with the system, but also with our documentation, this is going to be, of course, a key. All right, so now data.blackboard.com, this wonderful new data source that is important to us. Now, if you visit data.blackboard.com, you'll learn about the Insider program. And what it means is that you can sign up, and when it launches, you'll be able to get some preview, for example, of not just the data itself as we have that available right now at the developer tier for Blackboard Data, but also some new reports that are pre-made, and so an attempt at creating the visualization layer. So Blackboard Data is special because it helps us to start at a higher level of analysis. If you have access in your self-hosted system or in SaaS to the PG admin, to basically the backend database, you can see how many courses you have, you can see tools used and so forth. But Blackboard Data adds to it, and it adds analyze activity levels. It adds interactions. So previously, And we've done that in BB Stats, but in past projects as well. Astro was one of them, where we would walk through the activity accumulator and try to figure that out. How long did the students spend in the course? Or how many interactions did they have in the course? How long does it mean to be logged off so that you end the session? And so Blackboard Data takes care of that. And it is so wonderful because we now can create reports that show us how our students behaving inside of the course, but also how instructors are behaving. So how often instructors are logging in, how long are their Blackboard sessions, and of course the first level to changing behavior is to monitor it, is to measure it. Okay, so Blackboard Data is going to help us with those interactions and the time spent on activities, and I'll demonstrate in a second how we can create visualizations based on that. Now, for the next moment, what I'd like to do is let me go ahead and talk about some of the tools that we can use to take the spreadsheets or what comes out of Blackboard Data, which is typically CSV files if we're doing the using the interactive system, or many scripts like Python scripts as well. So some of the tools that you can choose from would be Power BI or ClickView or Tableau, and many of them have free layers. And it is so important that as developers, we all get really good at these tools, because again, they can help us to tell the right story. And there are free versions of them, so easy way to get started. So let me go ahead and switch then to a little demo where I'm going to first show you where you can find some of this key information, and then how we can use it in the system. Let me just find my sharing. Here we go. And there we go. So the first place to go when getting started with Blackboard Data, but also with visualizations, would be the community site. Why? Because there is a number of sources there that really help to get you started off the ground right away. Now, this is an example of a blog post where you can download the Tableau project and the sample spreadsheet, and then of course the sample spreadsheet happens to be a report that you pull out of the Blackboard Collaborate Scheduler that's going to give you details on your system. Now, the nice thing about the Tableau system is that when reports are created, you can download them and manipulate them. So there is a public section of the Tableau .com system that allows this really awesome level of collaboration. Now, when you do explore the Tableau public system, you will find the visualizations that other organizations, other industries have created. And certainly they're inspiring, but you can then download them and start editing them, either right in the browser, or there's the free version of the program that you download and manipulate. So the steps then are first to get the data, and then you would simply upload, as in this screenshot here. When you open Tableau, you will grab the Microsoft Excel file or the CSV file, and then you go ahead and put it into the Tableau system. This is a standard graph, and it shows us the storage. And then as I switch between the top tabs, this is to produce this idea of a story where we're going to maybe look at the data differently. So we have the course files here. This is the total size of files. We can look at protected files, which are the student submissions. And so this helps us to start figuring out what is happening in the system. Now, this report is actually a sample that also allows us then to start playing with some of the filters. So you can look only at much larger files, and then bring up the courses that that apply to that. Let's see in a minute now. Yep, so it'll filter that down. So this is a very basic way of just getting started, but making that switch from say Excel spreadsheets into a visualization. So then you will end up with a number of projects that you are pulling from the Learn system or from Collaborate system. And even though this is the public side of Tableau, you can still save them. You can make them hidden and retain them. You can also view them. So there's a URL for each one. So you can share those with your team and yet keep them unlisted. If you keep them visible, then anyone navigating to your profile will see those examples. Okay, so let me move to another example. So in this particular Tableau, we start with a very dry list of students and their activity. Then soon enough, we can switch to some visualizations. And the point here is that oftentimes when we think about running a report, we start with this idea that we know where the data is, or we think we can figure it out, and we are trying to confirm a hunch. Now that is not really a lot of learning, it's just confirming. It's just like when you talk to someone and they're not listening to you, all they're doing is just waiting to respond to you. So what I'm suggesting is that the use of Tableau with our data, if we are exploring the visualizations, we have a chance to learn something new instead of just trying to confirm something by running a report. So by playing with these visualizations, we might be able to catch on to a new story that is worth telling. And in this instance, we have a graph here of all our courses that at the moment looks somewhat wild. But then we can dial up the story by checking the average hours spent within the course. And so this is going to filter out our courses. And then we can check for the interactions that perhaps we would like to adjust. And then we can check for number of students within that graph, but then average visits. And so this helps us to see something that perhaps we were not already pre-planning. And so here is another view of just departments, and then how many visits were made, and we can also apply the view of time. And so here is another way to look at these at this data by again dialing up some of the elements, and you can see the visualization changing and giving you the display. And so we can filter that down to a specific department. And so let's say you have a visit with a department, and you'd like to bring out some of the courses that that they have within the specifications applied here. All right, here's another example where we have just a dump of the data that came in from Blackboard Data, and we are now able to dial things down and manipulate it. So at this point, we looked at a couple of options to start playing with Tableau and Blackboard Data. But there's actually something that we can do beyond that. And this particular piece means connecting Blackboard Data into a live site. And so there was an article that was published on the Blackboard community site. Let me just quickly switch my my window. So this particular article was part of the blog on emergency data that Blackboard was making available. And so it allows you to connect your Snowflake instance to a SQL server via ODBC. And not a big deal. I publish blogs on how to connect JODBC to Blackboard data. But what is special about this type of connection is that you are able to connect the SQL server and then keep versions of Blackboard data uh, internally on your campus so that you can run reports out of that. So for example, if you were wondering in years past, when did a faculty make courses available, right? In Blackboard data, you're going to have some information about it, but with this type of connectivity, you can travel in time. So you can see the various versions of data that were occurring throughout time. So we've done this here with some of our visualizations. So we have some reports for Collaborate, Learn, Google Meet, Teams, and so forth. And any of those, as we connect, we end up connecting to a local instance of Tableau. So what we're doing right now is not the free version. This is the enterprise installation of Tableau that allows us to run these reports. But starting with Blackboard Collaborate, we sure, let's do that. So some of the data we keep somewhat restricted, but with Blackboard Collaborate, we're able to produce this on a daily basis, just to provide some comparison to events and statistics on other sites. And let me demonstrate the Blackboard Learn report. So our goal in producing this report was to show really how the Blackboard system is being adopted, especially during the restrictions, the quarantine that we have. It turned out that the reports that we were providing just weren't fast enough. And so we were always a few days late. As is, this a direct connection to Blackboard data allowed us to produce this kind of a simple visualization per school. We can see which courses are available, which ones are not. But then we can also go into the details and then preview per course what are the events. So how many assessments, or how long the students spent in the course. And this kind of approach, and again, that's updated on a daily basis, really helped to inform the departments and the provost on what's happening with our learn system. And of course, if you recall, back in March, April, nobody knew what was happening, and it was certainly a time when refreshing reports by hand was just not getting the job done. The blog that I mentioned earlier, this blog is on the community site. It included a number of SQL packages, as well as access to the free reporting framework. And what it meant was that you were able to schedule reports out of Blackboard Learn and have them emailed to people. So again, this kind of idea that if people had to ask you for a report, or it was your job to refresh them every day, it was just not fast enough. And of course, Steve Bailey did a great job supporting everyone in that in this effort. And so it is worth mentioning the pyramid is another system for visualizations, and certainly the Blackboard Analytics product as well with integrating with that. All right, so this, I think, is a very good blog post to revisit to make sure that the two key SQL statements in it are fairly well digested by those who are trying to explore Blackboard activity. Now, in just a quick detail, these Blackboard SQL statements for Blackboard data, first one applies to course activity, and the other one applies to student activity. And let's see, I have a couple of posts here. Let me just briefly look at that. Sure. Um, all right. All right, it's coming up here momentarily. So here is one of the SQL statements that Steve made available. This one is very useful in helping advisors to figure out really what the students are doing inside of Blackboard. And this particular statement, which is detailed right below here, but this particular statement really tells instructors or advisors how long the students spend in the course, how long do they spend in collaborative sessions, how many interactions they had. And so what we did in this particular blog post is we just took a little spin on that, where we also added the average of these activities as well as interactions per course. So now when a advisor talks to the student, they can see that, hey, you spent an hour in the class, but on average students were spending 10 hours, within this class. So uh, this kind of a story that we can create around the data really is meaningful to these advisors, but also to the instructors that might be evaluating the level of engagement that students have in the course. So at this point, let me ask in the chat if you can provide just like a sentence-long way that you are using Blackboard data. In other words, how have you on your campus used Blackboard data, perhaps in terms of the specific reports, or maybe even stories that you were able to tell that helped your institution. So take a moment and see if you can share with us in the chat what are the stories that you were able to tell with Blackboard data. All right, no story is too small. So, all right, so Kevin, thank you. So, story about the use of Blackboard after going online for COVID-19. All right. Scott has the gamification engine, Badger triggers, collaborative attendance, DEF CON, registration data. Now, this, all right, Estelle, investigate what's happening currently while students are writing online exams with all the various course reports. Trina, using the, for instructor-student course information for course development and grade summary. Okay, and Michael, we haven't used Tell a Story, but we initially used it to keep track of our SIS system for monitoring deltas. All right, very nice. And Jeff, hours of Blackboard usage before and after COVID. And Rachel, scaling Blackboard products to support greater utilization. Very nice. And so, welcome, Rachel, the great support, of course, of Blackboard data. All right, Brian is saying how long a student takes during an exam, student activity during exam sessions, and overall student activity. Holly, we're currently only using Blackboard for communications and school website. All right, Jonathan Hart, use it to see what content items were most used with a set of courses. All right, very nice. So is it possible to get REST events logs via Blackboard data? Well, REST is a way to, of course, capture live data. Blackboard data would have identical data there. Blackboard data is not as fresh as REST, meaning it's refreshed daily. But rest, and I'm not sure if I'm understanding exactly your question, but certainly the same data is available with the addition then of the summaries of activity, of interactions, and so forth. In terms of logs, you can trace activity of students, so you can have a nice SQL and then an infographic created out of that that's going to provide you a history of students' activity. All right, so Johan says, so we use SIS, it has a nice GUI interface. Okay, all, all right, very nice. So certainly these are very much stories that are worth your time in grabbing the data, and then really how much more important that we find the right visualization that is going to help you to tell that story. Now, a number of visualizations are available to play with. And so if we look at the free Tableau site, there is a gallery for daily visualization. And so just to understand, what are the options? What are the tools for telling stories with visualizations? These are just great places to start. And you can, of course, open them, you can download them, you can start modifying them. So the great promise maybe of this Tableau public gallery for Blackboard is that if we start creating visualizations for Blackboard data on this public site, we can then start sharing it very quickly across institutions, because all you'll have to do is just grab the visualization and then download the story from Blackboard data, and here the story comes. So we can search within this site for things like education. And so here we're going to have a set of visualizations that we can explore for our industry. But then, of course, you can also say, hey, is there anything about Blackboard? My hope and my encouragement to all of you developers is that if you find a great snippet of data, and if you can build visualization along with that, on the Blackboard community side, let us know about it. And maybe we can come up with a tag, something, of course, as simple as Blackboard might work. But it would help us to share those stories. And again, how important it is to be able to change behavior of people by touching on their emotions, by using all these key elements of storytelling so that we can have the value out of Blackboard data. When I asked at the beginning how many of you know about Blackboard data versus how many were using it, I did not ask how many of you feel like you are changing the world with it. But next year at DEF CON, I'd like to ask that question. How many of you are really changing your world with Blackboard data? And I wouldn't be surprised if the right set of visualizations that we can create together and share would accomplish that purpose. So with that being the case, I appreciate your attendance. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'd like to certainly thank the Blackboard data team. I see Carlos is active here. I saw Rachel's comments earlier on, and of course Steve Bailey as well. And really, what a beautiful team doing great work. All right, so Vanessa saying, could you help me with a query? Yes, no problem. So Vanessa, if you post it as a discussion on the community system and then tag me, I'll find someone who will help you. No, I'm sure between all those Blackboard data people that are so active, we'll be able to find. All right, Michael or Malcolm Murray says, a comment from the land of GDPR. Okay, our European friends. The metric system, yes. So can you comment on any pre-checks you make on the data before sharing Tableau Public to keep the rights? Excellent. So yes, certainly. First of all, we of course have FERPA which protects the student names and personal information. So on one of the reports, I showed you a list of students, and they were all hashed. So I would take the student ID from Blackboard Data, which is, as far as we're concerned, a random number, and then do sh2 sum on it to come up with a hash, and that key, helps me to produce um, uh, something that I can tie the performance record to. So my public tableaus that, and most likely I'll keep it unlisted, but those public tableaus, if there is a need to drill down to a student level, I tend to hash the ID. Um, and then, of course, any data that we would feel particular about, I would not include on that. All right, out of their topic question, have you looked at Unity, Unreal for importance data to create 3D dynamic visualizations in the game environment? I am always looking at the 3D gaming environments, and I tell you what, not Unity, but I think Minecraft has a huge opportunity, especially the education version, because it's such a simple Java code, to help to create um, visualizations and experiences both for students and instructors on learning more about even onboarding people into online learning, because the graphics are so basic that we no longer have to ooh and ah over what the game system is able to display, but we are emerging the story immediately. Everything that's the 8-bit looking graphics, our brain corrects for it. You put a blue area, and that becomes the C, and you're okay with that. So I think the lower end graphics sometimes help us to tell the story quicker and to immerse the player a lot sooner than the development of the high-end engines that can they require higher-end devices as well. But no, you say the word game, and I'm into it right away. Uh, all right, so yes, so if you are not on SAS, you are not in the right place, and you can quote me on that. But to go on the right planet, you definitely want to be on SAS, because that's where the magic happens. That's where the magic happens with the base navigation, with of course Ultra, and with Blackboard Data. So, and I am not paid by Blackboard to say that, but if they do want to, I'm open to that as well. All right, so some of the lessons learned on visualizations can be used with exports of data. For example, when we go directly for Blackboard Collaborate data, we would go to the scheduler um, for a couple of reasons, but that's where we grab our Collaborate data. And of course, if you are self-hosted, then you have likely access the direct data access, so you can use that as a way to create visualizations. But the time spent, as well as the interactions logged within Blackboard Data are tremendous. Okay. Well, thank you all. I'm going to stop recording so we can start really talking about this.